The deed was a single page, yellowed and soft at the creases, written in his grandfather's steady, looping cursive. It spoke of the big oak by the granite outcrop, and following the spring-fed creek to the stand of pines. It was a document of memory and markers, not of meridians and section numbers. To Eli, it was more sacred than any Bible, for it was the story of his world. He'd learned that world by heart. He knew where the morel mushrooms would push through the loam each spring, the hidden bend in the river where the trout grew fat and lazy, the specific whistle of the wind through a crack in the ridge that meant a storm was coming. This knowledge was his true inheritance, written not on paper but in his bones. The suit from the city, with his polished shoes and tablet full of PDFs, spoke a foreign language. He talked of latches and quiet title, based on a tax lien from 1952 that had been sold, bundled, and forgotten. He presented crisp, computer-generated maps with precise red lines that sliced through the heart of the valley, declaring streams to be boundaries and memories to be irrelevant. Eli's lawyer, a tired man from the county seat, just shook his head. The paper they have is newer, Eli. The court favors the new paper. The fight was a slow, draining hemorrhage of hope and savings, ending in a sterile courtroom with a judge's gavel striking like a stone on his grandfather's grave. The land was still there, right outside the window, but a vital piece of it had been surgically removed, its title now sitting in a corporate filing cabinet 1,000 miles away. The first sound was the shriek of chainsaws, a sound so alien and violent it made the birds fall silent all at once. Then came the bulldozers, their diesel groans echoing off the hills as they pushed over stands of birch and pine with indifferent, hydraulic ease. From his porch, Eli watched the daily evisceration. The gentle slope where deer used to bed down was now a raw, open wound of red clay and shattered rock. The dust never settled, coating his garden and the leaves of the trees on his remaining land in a fine, gritty powder. The skeletons of the houses rose with a terrifying speed, each one a perfect copy of the last, spaced precisely 10 feet apart. Trucks came and went, hauling in materials that smelled of plastic and chemical treatments, not of sun-warmed wood and stone. Soon, the new people arrived, pulling into their driveways with cars full of flat-pack furniture and potted plants from a garden center. They erected fences where the wild blackberries used to grow, defining their new boundaries with treated lumber and pointedly avoiding looking toward the old stone house. Their children, dressed in bright, clean clothes, were warned not to wander into the unkempt woods. The HOA's first official letter came, citing the accumulation of natural debris on his property as a violation. It was signed by a board he'd never elected, for a community built on his stolen soil. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down with a wet, suffocating weight. The first drops were fat and sporadic, smacking against the dry earth like warnings. Then the heavens tore open. It wasn't a rainstorm, it was a siege. The world dissolved into a roaring, gray-white chaos, the wind driving water in horizontal sheets that lashed the stone house. Through the rattling window panes, Eli saw his pasture turning into a shallow lake, the water already carving angry little channels in the soil. He thought of the dam. His grandfather's voice was a whisper in the storm's roar. You respect its power, Eli. You hold it, but you also know when to let it go. He looked toward the development, a ghost of beige and gray through the downpour. Their storm drains, he knew, were already clogged with the silt from their own careless construction. They had turned the earth into a hard, impermeable slab. The water had nowhere to go. A cold, fatalistic calm settled over him. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about physics. It was about cause and effect. They had built a town in a riverbed and called it Progress. He was simply the one who would stop holding the river back. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an acceptance of an inevitable truth written in the water and the land. He was going to fulfill his grandfather's final lesson. He was going to let the river go. The iron wheel was ice-cold and rough with a lifetime of rust, biting into his palms as he threw his weight against it. For a terrifying second, it refused to budge, fused in place by time and neglect. Then, with a shriek that cut through the storm's roar, it gave. Eli spun it, the mechanism grinding and protesting, each turn a release of pent-up tension that seemed to vibrate up through his arms and into his very soul. When it would turn no further, he stepped back, his chest heaving, the rain instantly plastering his hair to his forehead. For a long moment, there was only the relentless drumming of the downpour. Then came a deep, subterranean groan, a sound he felt in his teeth. The water, which had been lapping meekly at the spillway's lip, suddenly gathered itself. It wasn't a release. It was an eruption. A single massive torrent exploded from the widened mouth of the pipe, a churning, brown beast set free. It hit the sluiceway and immediately overflowed it, tearing at the earthen banks with primal fury. It uprooted young saplings, gathered armfuls of scree and mud, and thundered down the slope with a sound like continuous thunder. It wasn't just water. It was the valley itself, mobilized and angry, a liquid avalanche aimed with perfect, indifferent precision at the geometric streets and manicured lawns below. Eli stood, a statue in the deluge, and watched it go. He had not unleashed this. He had simply stopped containing it. The new silence was profound. Gone was the distant, grinding hum of machinery, the faint echo of radios, the absurd sound of a single lawnmower that had persisted even through the early days of the storm. In its place was the drip of water from the eaves and the gentle, sucking sound of the flood slowly receding, pulling back from its conquest. The air, washed clean of dust and exhaust, carried the deep, fertile scent of wet earth and crushed pine. The valley's true perfume, finally able to breathe again. From the porch, Eli watched a great blue heron, a creature of stillness and patience, stalk through the newly created shallows where a foundation had been. It was a sight that filled him with a grim sense of rightness. Billingsley stood as if rooted in the mud, his face a mask of utter incomprehension. He wasn't looking at lost property. He was looking at a fundamental rewriting of reality he couldn't process. Eli's words weren't meant to be cruel, merely factual. The land had performed its own audit, correcting the ledger with brutal hydrological finality. The developers had built on a memory of a map. The river had remembered its own. As the murky water continued to drain, it left behind a gift. A thick, dark layer of silt, the very essence of the valley, deposited like a blessing over the scars. It was the first step in healing, a blanket to cover a grave. The work of reclaiming would be slow, done by wind, rain, and root, and Eli would be there to see it, the keeper of the quiet that had returned.